I faked a business trip and caught him with my sister. She was wearing my lingerie, standing in my bedroom. The shock on their faces when I opened the door was nothing compared to what I did next. I didn't just expose them, I unleashed a secret that would destroy them both. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. For 20 years, the scent of my home was the scent of my life. It was a complex and comforting blend, the sharp, clean note of the lemon polish I used on the oak floors every Friday, the rich, earthy aroma of coffee that seemed to be perpetually brewing in the kitchen, and, in the long, lazy days of summer, the sweet, almost decadent perfume of the climbing rose bushes Richard had planted for me by the kitchen window on our 5th anniversary. Our house, a sturdy, 2-story colonial on a quiet, tree-lined street where the neighbors still waved to each other, wasn't just a building constructed of wood and nails. It was a living museum of our lives, or more accurately, of the life I had so carefully curated. Every framed photo on the wall, every worn patch on the living room rug, every single coat of paint was a testament to a promise we had made on a sun-drenched afternoon in a small chapel. A promise of forever. My husband, Richard, and I had built what everyone, including myself, considered a good life. But looking back, the truth is that I had laid the foundation, piece by painstaking piece, and he had simply built his shining career on top of it. When my parents passed away within a year of each other, the inheritance they left wasn't a fortune, but it was a gift of security. It was enough for a hefty down payment on this very house, the one I fell in love with at first sight, and it was enough to provide the seed money for the small marketing firm he'd always dreamed of starting. He was the visionary, the risk-taker. I was the safety net. I'd gracefully stepped back from my own ambitions in graphic design, taking a stable, part-time administrative job at the local college. The pay wasn't great, but the hours were perfect. It meant I could be there for everything, the frantic morning school runs when the kids were little, the scraped knees in science projects, the home-cooked meals waiting on the table when Richard finally came home, his mind still buzzing with deals and deadlines. I created a world of quiet, unwavering stability so he could feel free to chase his dreams. And, for a long time, it seemed our partnership worked beautifully. His firm flourished, his salary grew exponentially, and our life became more than just comfortable. It became an emblem of success in our small community. In all those years, through all the seasons of our life, there was one other constant, one other pillar holding up my world, my little sister, Audrey. 5 years my junior, she had always been my shadow, my confidant, my other half. We were the kind of sisters you see in sentimental movies, the ones who can finish each other's sentences from across a crowded room and communicate entire paragraphs with just a single look. She lived only a few towns over with her steady, reliable husband, Walter, and hardly a week went by that we didn't see each other. She'd often pop over for coffee on a weekday afternoon, her eyes scanning my sun-drenched living room, my meticulously tended garden, my life. She'd take a sip from her mug and let out a soft sigh. "Carolyn, you really have it all," she'd say, her voice a familiar, wistful mix of admiration and something else, something I couldn't quite name at the time. A beautiful home that looks like it's out of a magazine, a successful husband who still looks at you like you're the only woman in the world. You're just so lucky. And the most foolish part? I believed it. I drank it in. I truly did. I felt lucky. I saw the way Richard's eyes would still light up when I walked into a dinner party. I felt the easy, familiar way he'd loop an arm around my waist while we were watching TV. I saw the unconditional love and friendship in my own sister's smile. These were the fundamental truths upon which I had built the entirety of my adult world. I never, not in my wildest, most terrifying nightmares, imagined that the very foundation was rotten to the core. I never imagined that the two people I trusted most in the universe were the ones systematically, gleefully, dismantling everything I held dear, right under my own roof. The truth, when it finally decided to reveal itself, didn't arrive with a thunderous bang. It started with something small. Something soft. It started with a sweater. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that feels like it should be a Friday. A long, tedious budget meeting at the college had been cancelled at the last minute, and I found myself with a rare, unexpected gift, a free afternoon. My first thought was of Richard. I decided to head home early, maybe surprise him. We could go for a walk, or perhaps try that new Italian place for an early dinner. It was a simple, happy thought. Pulling into the driveway, I saw Audrey's familiar blue sedan parked out front. A smile touched my lips. It was a common, comforting sight. An impromptu sisterly chat over coffee was just the thing to make the afternoon perfect. I let myself in through the front door, calling out as I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl on the hall table. "Hello? Anyone home?" The house was quiet. Too quiet. I found them in the living room. Richard was on the couch, flipping through a magazine, and Audrey was standing by the fireplace, her back to me, admiring a painting. But the atmosphere felt wrong. The easy silence wasn't comfortable, it was tense. The laughter I expected to hear died in my throat. They both turned as I walked in, and their reactions were jarring. Richard's smile looked plastered on, unnatural. Audrey's whole body seemed to stiffen. "Carolyn. You're home early," he said, his voice a full octave too loud, too cheerful. It grated on my ears. Audrey turned around slowly, a hesitant smile on her face. And that's when I saw it. The sight was so incongruous, so bizarre, that my brain took a full second to process it. She was wearing my sweater. Not just any sweater. It was a deep, luxurious, sapphire blue cashmere turtleneck. It had been an extravagant purchase, a gift I'd bought for myself with my first bonus to celebrate my 45th birthday. It was delicate, ridiculously soft, and I adored it. I'd only worn it twice, saving it for special occasions. And here was Audrey, wearing it like it was an old sweatshirt, standing in my living room on a random Tuesday afternoon. A strange feeling, cold and sharp as a needle, pricked at the base of my neck. "Audrey," I said, struggling to keep my voice light, casual. "That's my sweater." Her face immediately flushed, a deep, blotchy red that spread down her neck. "Oh, this," she stammered, her hands flying to the hem, pulling at it nervously. I got a little chilly, and you have so many beautiful things. I saw it in your closet and was just trying it on for a second. I was going to ask, I swear. But she hadn't asked. And the way she was looking at me, her eyes wide with an emotion that looked terrifyingly like guilt, made my stomach clench into a tight, painful knot. This was my sister, the person I shared everything with. Why would she sneak into my closet? Richard stood up then, moving with a practiced smoothness to place himself physically between us. It was a subtle gesture, but it felt like he was shielding her from me. "Honey, don't be silly," he said with a dismissive little laugh. "It's just a sweater. It looks great on her, doesn't it? Let her borrow it." He turned to Audrey. "Don't worry about it." His words were meant to be placating, but they felt like a tiny betrayal. He was taking her side. No, it's fine," I forced myself to say, the smile on my face feeling stiff and foreign. It surprised me, that's all." The air in the room was thick with unspoken words, heavy with a tension I couldn't understand. Audrey practically tore the sweater off, her movements clumsy and frantic. She folded it messily, I cringed internally, and placed it on the arm of a chair. "I'm so sorry, Carolyn. Really. I shouldn't have." They made their excuses a few minutes later, something about needing to grab a coffee before Walter got home. They left together, a little too quickly. I stood in the silent living room for a long time after they were gone. The quiet felt different now. It wasn't peaceful, it was empty. I walked over to the chair and picked up the sweater. It was still warm from her body. I lifted the soft cashmere to my face, intending to fold it properly, and that's when the first real crack in my perfect world appeared, splintering out like a spiderweb in glass. It wasn't just Audrey's faint, floral scent on the fabric. Underneath it, faint but unmistakable, was the spicy, woodsy smell of Richard's cologne. The same expensive cologne I'd bought him for our last anniversary. And it wasn't the fleeting scent of a brief, friendly hug. It was the lingering, embedded scent of closeness. The scent of an embrace that lasted longer than it should have. The scent of a profound and intimate lie. My beautiful, perfect house suddenly felt very, very cold. After the sweater incident, it was like a faulty switch had been flipped in my brain. A part of my mind that had been dormant for 20 years, the part that notices, that questions, that doubts, hummed to life with a startling, unwelcome energy. I started seeing things, hearing things, connecting dots I hadn't even known existed. The world hadn't changed, but my perception of it had been irrevocably altered, and every little detail that had once seemed innocent and mundane now felt sharp and heavy with sinister meaning. I began to notice the way Richard guarded his phone. He had always been attached to it for his business, but this was different, more territorial. He would be sitting on the couch, texting, and if I walked into the room, he would subtly angle the screen away from my line of sight. He started taking it with him everywhere, even into the bathroom. If he left it on the kitchen counter and I happened to walk nearby, he would make a point of striding over, picking it up, and slipping it into his pocket with a casualness that was anything but. One evening, I was reading in bed. He was already asleep, or so I thought. His phone, on the nightstand between us, buzzed softly, lighting up the dark room. I glanced over, and for the briefest of moments, before he lunged for it with a speed that startled me, I saw the name on the screen. Audrey. It was 10:30 at night. He snatched it up, his back to me. Just a late email from the West Coast office, he muttered, his voice thick with fake sleepiness. He got out of bed and walked into the bathroom, closing the door firmly behind him. I heard the low murmur of his voice, too quiet to make out the words. Work stuff? With my sister? The lie was so blatant, so insulting, it left a bitter taste in my mouth. Then there were the coincidences, a string of perfectly aligned excuses that started to feel less like chance and more like a coordinated effort. I'd call Audrey on a Thursday to make plans for the weekend, and she'd tell me she was busy. Oh, Walter and I are driving up to the lake house on Saturday, she'd say. A last-minute thing. A few hours later, Richard would come home from work and announce, "Honey, you won't believe it, but I have to fly out to Chicago for a one-day conference on Saturday." A huge new client. It happened once, and I thought nothing of it. Twice, and I felt a flicker of unease. The third time, when their separate, last-minute plans once again created a perfect window of unsupervised time, a cold, sickening dread began to pool in my stomach. I wasn't a wife or a sister anymore. I was an obstacle. An inconvenience they had to schedule their lives around. I started paying closer attention, turning into a detective in my own life. I was putting away laundry one afternoon, walking down the hall past his home office. The door was ajar. I heard him on the phone, his voice low and intimate. I paused, pressing myself against the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. I couldn't hear the whole conversation, but I caught one phrase, delivered in a soft, conspiratorial tone that made my skin crawl. "Don't worry," he said. "She'll never know." I felt the blood drain from my face. I stood frozen in the hallway, clutching a stack of his perfectly folded shirts to my chest. Who was he talking to? What was it that I, his wife of 20 years, would never know? When he came out of the office a few minutes later, he was smiling, relaxed. He saw me and his smile widened. He wrapped his arms around me, burying his face in my hair. "Just finalizing a big deal," he said. "This is going to be great for us." I smiled back, a hollow, brittle thing, but inside, I was screaming. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that confirmed I wasn't just paranoid or imagining things, was the phone bill. It was an old habit we'd never broken, receiving a paper statement in the mail. I was sorting through a stack of bills at the kitchen table, and I opened it without much thought. And there it was. A log of every call, every text, laid out in neat columns of black and white. My eyes scanned the page, and then they stopped. There were dozens of calls, not just to Audrey's cell, but calls lasting 30, 40, even 60 minutes. And the timestamps told their own story. They were placed late at night, after I'd gone to sleep. They were placed during the day, when he was supposedly in meetings. My hands started to shake so badly I had to put the papers down. I sat there at my familiar kitchen table, the afternoon sun streaming in through the window, and I felt like my world was tilting off its axis. This wasn't a close brother-in-law and sister-in-law relationship. This wasn't work stuff. This was a secret life, a whole world of communication that was happening right under my nose. A world I was deliberately excluded from. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the edge of the table. My sister. My Richard. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. No. It couldn't be. My mind recoiled from the conclusion, from the sheer ugliness of it. It was too sordid, too monstrous to even consider. But the evidence was piling up, piece by sickening, undeniable piece. The sweater. The phone. The late-night calls. The lies. I knew then that I couldn't keep lying to myself any longer. I couldn't keep accepting their flimsy excuses and their placating smiles. I had to know the truth, no matter how much it was going to destroy me. That evening, I sat alone in the living room after Richard had gone to bed, the house shrouded in darkness. I opened my laptop. My fingers, cold and trembling, typed small wireless home security cameras into the search bar. I scrolled through the endless options, my heart pounding a sick, frantic rhythm against my ribs. I felt like a stranger in my own life, a spy in my own home. But the trusting woman, the woman who believed in her perfect marriage and her loving sister, was gone. She had died sometime between the scent of cologne on a sweater and the damning numbers on a phone bill. In her place was a woman who needed cold, hard proof. I found a 2-camera kit with good reviews. One for the living room. And one for my bedroom. I clicked buy now without a moment's hesitation. The package would arrive in 2 days. 2 days until I would know for sure if my entire 20-year marriage was a lie. The 2 days I waited for that plain brown box to arrive were the longest and most surreal of my life. I moved through my home, through my daily routines, like an automaton. Every familiar object, every cherished photograph, seemed to mock me with a silent, knowing stare. The photo on our mantelpiece, Richard and I on our wedding day, young and beaming with naive hope, felt like a cruel joke. Was that adoring smile on his face real, or was it the first of 20 years of performances? The picture of Audrey and me at the beach, arms slung around each other, laughing into the camera, was that genuine sisterly love, or was she laughing at me even then? I felt a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety, a knot of dread in my stomach that tightened with every passing hour. I was a gracious host to a civil war inside my own body. I was polite to Richard, asking about his day. I answered Audrey's cheerful texts about a new recipe she tried. It was all an act. Inside, I was holding my breath, waiting for the axe to fall. The package arrived on a Thursday, left on the porch like any other delivery. I snatched it up before Richard could see it and hid it in the back of my closet, tucked away under a pile of old blankets. The next morning, as soon as his car disappeared down the street, I retrieved it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely slice through the packing tape. The cameras were shockingly small, smaller than a salt shaker, their tiny black lenses like unblinking eyes. They felt heavy in my hand, heavy with the truth they were about to reveal. Placing them was a quiet, desperate act. I put the first one on the high bookshelf in the living room, nestled between a set of old, leather-bound encyclopedias that no one ever touched. It was virtually invisible. The second one was harder. My bedroom. Our bedroom. The intimacy of the space, the shared history held within its walls, made the act of planting a camera feel like the ultimate violation. But I had to know. It was a poison, and the only way to get it out was to lance the wound. I finally tucked it into a decorative wicker basket on top of the tall armoire in the corner, carefully arranging a piece of dried foliage to obscure it further. The tiny lens had a clear, unobstructed view of the entire room, including my closet and our bed. I spent an hour setting them up, linking them to a secure, password-protected app on my phone. My heart pounded with a mixture of terror and grim determination. The trap was set. Now, all I could do was wait. For a week, nothing happened. The footage was a slideshow of my own mundane life. I watched myself dusting the very bookshelf that hid the camera. I watched Richard reading the paper in his favorite armchair. It was so painfully normal that I began to feel foolish, even ashamed. A desperate flicker of hope ignited within me. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this was all a product of a wild, unfounded jealousy. Maybe I was the crazy, paranoid wife he'd so easily accused me of being. I almost took them down. I came so close to deleting the app and trying to forget, to go back to my life of comfortable blindness. I thank God every day that I didn't. The following Saturday, my carefully constructed world finally imploded. Richard told me he had to go into the office for a few hours. Just need to catch up on some end-of-quarter paperwork, he said, kissing me goodbye. It was a familiar excuse. An hour later, as if on cue, my phone rang. It was Audrey. Her voice was bright, bubbly, and utterly fake. Hey, sis. Walter's out on the golf course all day with his buddies, and I am bored out of my mind. Can I please come over and hang out? We can binge that new show you were telling me about. My blood ran cold. The coordinated timing was no longer a coincidence, it was an insult. Oh, honey, I can't, I lied, my voice a tight, strained imitation of my own. I have a million errands to run that I've been putting off for weeks. I'll be out all afternoon. Oh, what a shame, she said, and the disappointment in her tone was so perfectly performed it was masterful. Okay, well, some other time then. As soon as I hung up, I knew. This was it. I grabbed my purse and my car keys, my mind racing but strangely clear. I called out to Richard in his office that I was heading out. He just grunted in response, not even looking up from his computer. I didn't go run errands. I drove to a small coffee shop at the end of our street, one with a clear view of my house from its parking lot. I bought a coffee I didn't drink, and I sat in my car, the engine off, and I watched. I didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes later, Richard's car pulled into our driveway. He got out and went inside. Not even 10 minutes after that, Audrey's familiar blue sedan pulled up to the curb. She got out, practically jogging to the front door, glancing over her shoulder once, a quick, furtive movement, before disappearing inside. My hands were trembling so violently I almost dropped my phone. I fumbled with the screen, my thumb slipping twice before I managed to open the camera app. My breath hitched in my throat. The living room camera was on. And I saw them. They were right there, in the center of the screen, in the center of my home. They were kissing. Not a friendly peck on the cheek. It was a deep, hungry, desperate kiss, his hands tangled in her hair, her arms wrapped tightly around his neck. I felt the air leave my lungs in a silent, agonizing scream. I couldn't breathe. My vision swam. I forced myself to switch the feed to the bedroom camera. The screen was black for a moment, and then the light flickered on as they entered the room. Audrey walked into the center of the frame. She stood in the middle of my bedroom, our bedroom, and did a slow, deliberate turn, a smug, triumphant little smile on her face as she surveyed her kingdom. Then she walked over to my closet. My closet. She opened the doors and began to run her hands over my clothes, my dresses, my blouses. And then she did something so vile, so deeply twisted, that it shattered the last remaining piece of my heart into dust. She reached into my lingerie drawer. She pulled out a delicate, black lace set I had bought for my anniversary with Richard, one he had told me he loved, one I had felt beautiful in. She held it up against her body, admiring her reflection in the full-length mirror on the closet door. And then, slowly, she began to undress. She slipped off her own clothes and put on my lingerie. My lingerie. Standing in my bedroom. Just then, Richard walked back into the frame. He stopped in the doorway, a predatory, appreciative grin spreading across his face as he looked her up and down. "Wow," he mouthed, his eyes dark with a lust that was meant only for me. He walked over to her, wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, and pulled her toward our bed. I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the passenger seat floor. I couldn't watch anymore. I couldn't see another second. A violent wave of sickness washed over me, so intense I had to shove the car door open, leaning out and gasping for the cool afternoon air. The image was burned into my brain, a searing, eternal photograph of my life's greatest betrayal. My sister, wearing my lingerie, in my bed, with my husband. It wasn't just an affair. It was a conquest. A hostile takeover. She wasn't just taking my husband, she was methodically taking my life, trying it on for size, piece by piece. The sweater, the lingerie, my home, my husband. I sat there in my car, the sounds of the street fading into a dull, meaningless roar in my ears. The world I knew, the life I had built, had just ended. And in its place, something cold, hard, and terrifyingly resolute began to grow. I don't know how long I sat in that car, my coffee getting cold beside me, staring at the front of my house, a place that was no longer a home but a stage for my humiliation. It could have been 10 minutes or an hour. Time lost all meaning, stretching and compressing in a nauseating rhythm. The initial shock, that gut-wrenching, soul-crushing wave of pain that felt like a physical blow, slowly began to recede. It didn't disappear, not at all. It just changed. It condensed, cooled, and hardened into something else. It settled deep in the pit of my stomach, a heavy, solid, immovable object. It was rage. A pure, cold, silent rage I had never experienced before in my entire life. It was so potent it felt like a new source of power humming in my veins. The tears I thought would come, the hysterical sobs I would have expected, never arrived. My eyes were dry, burning. I reached over and picked my phone up from the floor. My hand was surprisingly steady. I opened the camera app again. I didn't look at the live feed, I couldn't bear it. I went to the recordings. With methodical, deliberate taps, I downloaded the entire horrifying sequence of events, their passionate kiss in my living room, Audrey's perverse fashion show in my closet, the final, unforgivable act in my bedroom. I saved the file to a hidden folder on my phone and then immediately uploaded it to a secure cloud drive, creating a second, untouchable copy. Evidence. Ammunition. My mind, which had been a chaotic storm of pain and confusion just moments before, was suddenly, startlingly clear. My purpose was singular. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to storm into the house in a screaming match. That's exactly what they would expect. That would give them the power, allow them to label me as the hysterical, emotional wife. They would twist my pain, my justifiable anger, and turn me into the villain of their sordid little story. No. My revenge wouldn't be loud and messy. It would be quiet, calculated, and absolute. I wasn't just going to leave them. I was going to meticulously dismantle their lives, brick by brick, just as they had tried to dismantle mine. I finally started my car and drove home, but I didn't pull into the driveway. I parked down the street, in the shade of a large oak tree, and I waited. About an hour later, I saw Audrey's blue sedan pull out of the driveway. She drove away with a jaunty little wave to my front door, a wave to the man still inside. A few minutes after that, Richard left, presumably heading back to his fake office work to establish his alibi. Only then, when the coast was clear, did I drive the final block and pull into my own garage. Walking into my house felt different. It was tainted, violated. The very air felt thick with their deceit. I walked straight upstairs to my bedroom. I stood in the doorway, looking at the rumpled sheets on my bed, the faint indentation of their bodies still visible. Without a moment's hesitation, I stripped the bed. I bundled up the sheets, the duvet, the pillows, everything. I didn't want to wash them, I wanted to incinerate them. I took the bundle out to the large trash bin in the garage and shoved it in, burying it under bags of lawn clippings. Then I went back inside, found a can of aerosol disinfectant, and sprayed the entire room, a desperate, futile attempt to erase the scent of their betrayal. That night, after a long, scalding shower, I began to plan in earnest. The first thing I did was open my laptop and research the best divorce lawyer in the state. I didn't look for someone who was compassionate or understanding. I read reviews for hours, searching for words like shark, pitbull, ruthless. I found a name that appeared again and again, Eleanor Vance. Her professional tagline was simply, strategic, uncompromising, effective. She was perfect. I composed a brief, discreet email outlining the situation in the starkest terms and requesting an urgent consultation. Next, I turned my attention to our finances. For years, I had let Richard handle the big picture, the investments, the retirement planning, while I managed the day-to-day household budget. Now, I dug into everything. I went online, using the passwords I knew, and uncovered a world of financial infidelity that mirrored the physical one. I found statements for credit cards I didn't even know he had. Statements filled with charges for expensive dinners for two at restaurants he'd never taken me to, hotel rooms in nearby cities, and gifts, jewelry, designer bags, that I had never received. It was all there, a clear, damning financial map of his secret life with my sister. I printed everything. Every last statement, every single suspicious receipt. The most painful part was seeing how he had been systematically bleeding our joint savings account, money I had so carefully set aside from my own part-time salary, money that was supposed to be our safety net. He had been using our future to fund his sordid present. The seed of a plan, one that had been germinating in the back of my mind, began to fully bloom. A public confrontation was too messy. A quiet exit was too kind. They deserved to be exposed, but on my terms. In a way that would leave them with nothing. No excuses. No escape. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Richard had a business trip to Chicago coming up in 2 weeks. A 3-day conference. I had a very strong feeling I knew who his business was going to be with. But this time, I wouldn't be sitting at home, dutifully watering the plants and waiting for his call. This time, I would create a trip of my own. A fake business trip. I would give them the stage, the rope, and I would calmly, patiently, watch them hang themselves. For the very first time in months, I felt a flicker of something other than pain. It was a cold, sharp, exhilarating feeling. It was power. And I was just beginning to understand how to wield it. The following 2 weeks were a masterclass in deception, the most difficult and draining performance of my life. I became a consummate actress in my own home, playing the role of the loving, attentive, and completely unsuspecting wife. Every moment was a struggle, a battle against the rage and disgust that churned constantly in my gut. Every practiced smile I gave Richard felt like a lie that coated my tongue. Every time I answered a call from Audrey and had to listen to her cheerful, mindless chatter about her day, about Walter, about a new pair of shoes she'd bought, I had to physically bite the inside of my cheek to keep from screaming the truth down the phone line. But I held it together. My rage was a cold, hard stone in my chest, a source of strength, and I guarded it carefully. My entire plan depended on my ability to maintain this illusion. I had my consultation with the lawyer, Eleanor Vance, the following week. Her office was exactly as I'd imagined, stark, modern, all glass and brushed steel, with a panoramic view of the city. She was a woman in her late 50s, impeccably dressed, with intelligent, sharp eyes and an air of calm, unshakable competence. I didn't cry. I sat across the polished mahogany desk from her and laid out the story calmly, methodically, as if I were describing a plot from a movie. I told her about the sweater, the phone bills, and finally, the cameras. I took out my phone, slid it across the desk, and played her a 30-second clip of the video, the part where Audrey puts on my lingerie. She watched the screen without flinching, her expression utterly unreadable. When the clip ended, she simply tapped the screen to pause it and looked at me. "Good," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of sentiment. "This is irrefutable. You've done the hard work. Now, let me do mine." We spent the next hour mapping out a comprehensive legal strategy. She advised me on exactly how to separate my finances to protect myself, how to legally secure the inheritance money that was solely mine, and what to expect during the inevitable divorce proceedings. I left her office feeling different. Stronger. Vindicated. I wasn't just a woman scorned anymore, I was a woman with a plan and a very, very good lawyer. The day I was supposed to leave for my business trip to Denver, the air in our house was thick with a strange, electric tension that only I could feel. I packed my suitcase in our bedroom while Richard was in the shower. I folded my clothes with steady, deliberate hands. I felt eerily calm, like a soldier preparing for a battle they knew they would win. He came out of the bathroom, a towel wrapped around his waist, steam billowing around him. He smiled at me, a warm, husbandly smile that now looked grotesque. "Going to miss you," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. The casual intimacy of it, the sheer, breathtaking hypocrisy, almost made me falter. For a split second, the old Carolyn wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers. But I pushed her down. I smiled back. "You too," I said, my voice even. "It's only for 3 days." Right on cue, as I was zipping my suitcase shut, my phone rang. It was Audrey. "Oh, I'm so jealous you get to go to Denver," she gushed, her voice oozing fake enthusiasm. "The mountains are so beautiful this time of year. Have so much fun, okay? And call me when you get there." "I will," I said, my voice as sweet as poison. "Talk to you soon, sis." I dragged my suitcase downstairs. Richard carried it out to the car for me, a perfect portrait of a doting husband. He kissed me goodbye, a long, lingering kiss that felt like ash in my mouth. "Have a safe flight," he said. I put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway, watching him wave from the doorway in my rearview mirror until I turned the corner. But I didn't drive to the airport. I drove 20 minutes across town to a small, anonymous hotel on the far side of the city, a place I had booked online under my maiden name. I checked in with cash, took the elevator up to my room on the 3rd floor, and double-locked the door behind me. The room was bland, impersonal. A queen-sized bed with a questionable floral bedspread, a small desk, a television bolted to the wall. But to me, it was a command center. It was my war room. I took my laptop out of my bag, connected to the hotel's Wi-Fi, and pulled up the live feed from the cameras in my house. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, my heart pounding a slow, heavy, rhythmic beat, and I watched. And I waited. For the first day, nothing happened. The house was empty and quiet. Richard came home from work at his usual time, microwaved a frozen dinner, and ate it while watching sports on the television. He went to bed early. I sat in my sterile hotel room, watching the silent, empty rooms of my house, and started to feel a prickle of doubt. What if I was wrong? What if this whole plan was a mistake? What if he really was just going to be alone? But my instincts, the ones I had ignored for so long but were now screaming at me, told me to be patient. And they were right. On the second evening, it happened. I had been watching the living room camera feed for hours, my eyes dry and tired. Then, around 7 p.m., the front door opened. It was Richard. And right behind him, silhouetted in the doorway, was Audrey. She was carrying an overnight bag. My overnight bag. The little floral one I kept in the guest room closet for visitors. They didn't even hesitate. They dropped their bags in the hallway and fell into each other's arms, kissing with a desperate, familiar passion that spoke of countless stolen moments. He whispered something in her ear, and she threw her head back and laughed. The sound was silent on my screen, but I could imagine it perfectly. It was the carefree, triumphant laugh of someone who thought they had gotten away with everything. It was the sound of my world ending. But it was also the sound of their world about to go up in flames. I watched them for another hour, my fingers clutching the edge of the laptop. I watched them open a bottle of my best wine, the one I had been saving. I watched them sit on my couch, his hand resting possessively on her thigh. I watched them walk into my kitchen, his arms wrapped around her waist as she leaned against my counter. They were so comfortable, so brazenly at home. It was sickeningly clear this wasn't the first time. This was a well-rehearsed, well-practiced routine. Finally, I saw them finish their wine and head towards the staircase, towards my bedroom. That was my cue. I snapped the laptop shut. I stood up, my body humming with a strange, electric energy. The waiting was over. The performance was about to end. It was time for the curtain to fall. The 20-minute drive from the hotel back to my house felt like an eternity. Every red light was a personal insult, a delay I couldn't afford. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were bone white. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was a vessel of pure, cold purpose. I pulled onto my street and parked a block away, under the cloak of darkness, walking the rest of the way through the cool, silent night air. My house was dark, except for the soft, intimate glow of the lamp in the master bedroom. My bedroom. My key, the key they thought was hundreds of miles away in Denver, slid into the lock of my front door. It made a soft, metallic click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent neighborhood. I pushed the door open as quietly as I could and slipped inside, closing it gently behind me until I heard the latch catch. The house was still. The only sound was the faint, tinny murmur of the television coming from upstairs. They were in my room, watching my TV, lying in my bed. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it fueled the fire inside me, burning away any last flicker of hesitation. I walked up the stairs, my feet silent on the plush carpet runner I had picked up myself just last year. I reached the top of the landing and paused outside my bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of warm light spilling into the dark hallway. I could hear them talking now, their voices low and intimate, punctuated by soft laughter. I heard Audrey laugh, a breathy, contented sound that made my stomach churn with a toxic mix of bile and rage. I took one last, deep breath. This was it. There was no turning back. I pushed the door open. It swung inward with a soft, almost polite creak. The flickering blue light from the television screen washed over their faces as they lay in my bed, tangled together under my favorite quilt. For a split second, a single, eternal moment, they didn't see me. And then Richard's head turned toward the door. His eyes met mine. They widened. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, pale gray. He froze completely, his mouth falling open in a silent O of pure, unadulterated shock. Audrey, who had been propped up on an elbow, whispering something to him, followed his horrified gaze. When her eyes landed on me, standing in the doorway like an avenging ghost, a choked, terrified gasp escaped her lips. She scrambled frantically to pull the sheet up to her chin, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold onto it. Her eyes, wide with a terror so profound it was almost satisfying to watch, were locked on mine. The air in the room turned thick, heavy, impossible to breathe. The only sound was the mindless, cheerful chatter from some late-night talk show on the television. I stood there for a long moment, a silent statue in the doorway, letting them soak in the full, catastrophic reality of what was happening. I let them see the look on my face. It wasn't the grief or hysteria they might have expected. It was the calm, placid, unreadable expression of a judge about to deliver a final, inescapable sentence. I took one deliberate step into the room. Then another. My voice, when I finally spoke, was unnervingly quiet, dangerously calm in the charged silence. I looked directly at my sister, my little sister, huddled in my bed like a frightened, cornered animal. "That lingerie set," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a shard of glass. Does it fit you okay, Audrey? I bought it for a special occasion. A strangled sob broke from her throat, a wounded, pathetic sound. Richard finally found his voice, though it was just a pathetic, stammering whisper. Carolyn, what are you doing here? Your trip, your flight. The trip was lovely, I said, never taking my eyes off Audrey's terrified face. The weather in Denver is just perfect this time of year. But I decided to come home early. I had a nagging feeling I was missing all the fun. I let the silence hang in the air again, a weapon in itself. I watched the raw panic flicker between them, the frantic, silent communication of two people caught in a trap of their own making. They were cornered. And they knew it. There was no excuse, no lie, no escape route big enough to get them out of this. If you're still listening, please help me by liking this video and commenting the number 1 below. That way, I'll know you gave me a like, and I'll know you're right here with me on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement for me. Please, comment the number 1, and then listen to what happened next. Get out, I said. My voice was still quiet, but it had an edge of cold, hard steel that made them both flinch as if I had physically struck them. Carolyn, please, just listen to me, Richard started, trying to swing his legs out of the bed, to regain some semblance of control. I repeated, raising my voice for the first time, the sound cracking like a whip in the small room. Get out. I pointed a trembling finger toward the door. Both of you. Out of my bed. Out of my house. Now. What followed was a clumsy, pathetic, and deeply humiliating scramble. Audrey, sobbing hysterically now, tried to untangle herself from the sheets to find her clothes, which were scattered in a sordid pile on the floor. Richard just sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, completely stunned into silence, before finally, mechanically, pulling on his pants. Neither of them would look at me. They couldn't. Their shame was a palpable thing in the room. I stood in the doorway like a sentinel, my arms crossed over my chest, watching them gather their things. Their movements were jerky and panicked, like startled insects. Audrey couldn't find her shoes. She was on her hands and knees, still pathetically wrapped in my bedsheet, crying as she fumbled around in the dark near the foot of the bed. I just watched her, feeling an icy detachment. The woman who had loved this girl, who had practically raised her, was gone. I felt nothing. No pity. No sympathy. Nothing but a vast, cold emptiness where my love for her used to be. Leave them, I said to her, my voice flat. You can leave barefoot for all I care. Just get out of my sight. I followed them down the stairs, their bare feet slapping against the hardwood floors. They stumbled toward the front door like two condemned prisoners. Richard finally turned to me at the door, his face a mask of desperate, pleading regret. Carolyn, we can talk about this. Please. We can fix this. I laughed. It was a short, bitter, ugly sound that I didn't recognize as my own. Fix this? Richard, are you insane? There is nothing to fix. You and I are done. This marriage is over. I then turned my glacial gaze to my sister, who was now just a weeping, shivering mess by the door. As for you, I said, my voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You are no longer my sister. You are nothing to me. I want you both out of my sight. If you are not off my property in 60 seconds, I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing. That was the final blow. The threat of public humiliation, of flashing blue and red lights in our quiet, respectable neighborhood, was more terrifying to them than my anger. Richard grabbed Audrey by the arm, his face white with panic, and practically dragged her out the front door into the darkness. I watched them go, then I shut the door, turned the deadbolt with a satisfyingly loud thud, and leaned my forehead against the cool, solid wood. The silence that descended was absolute, a stark contrast to the chaos of the last 10 minutes. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just breathed. In and out. Then, I walked calmly to the kitchen, poured myself a large glass of ice water, and drank it in one long, steady swallow. My hand didn't shake at all. The next morning, I was up before the sun. I hadn't slept, but I wasn't tired. I was running on a pure, high-octane fuel of adrenaline and purpose. I executed the first steps of my plan with a cold, swift efficiency that surprised even myself. The first call I made, at 7 a.m. sharp, was to my bank's 24-hour fraud line. I explained the situation in clipped, professional tones, citing financial misconduct by my spouse, and had them freeze all of our joint accounts and credit cards immediately. Then, I transferred the entirety of my inheritance, which had remained in a separate, untouched account in my name, to a new account at a completely different bank. The financial wall was up. He was cut off. The second call was to Eleanor Vance, my lawyer. I caught her on her cell phone as she was on her way to the office. "It happened," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I have them. On video. In my house. I kicked them out last night." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Good," she replied, "all business. Don't talk to either of them. Do not answer their calls, their texts, or their emails. Let everything go through me. I'll have the divorce papers filed with the court by noon today." The third call was to a 24-hour locksmith. By 9 a.m., a friendly, burly man in a blue jumpsuit was at my front door, efficiently changing every single lock on the house, including the garage and the back gate. As he worked, drilling out the old locks, my phone started blowing up. First, a string of frantic, increasingly angry texts from Richard. "Carolyn, answer me. We need to talk. What did you do to the credit cards? I can't even buy gas." This was followed by, "You can't do this. This is our money. You're being insane." Then the calls started, one after another. I watched his name flash on the screen again and again, and I just let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then came the texts from Audrey, a pathetic, manipulative mix of tearful apologies and passive-aggressive accusations. "Carolyn, I am so sorry. My heart is broken. I never meant for this to happen." This was followed by, "You don't understand what he's like. He pressured me, he said you two were unhappy." I snorted out loud and deleted the messages without replying. The cowardice was almost as disgusting as the betrayal itself. I spent the rest of the day in a flurry of purposeful activity. I went through the house and took down every single picture of Richard, of Audrey, of the three of us together. I packed them all into a large cardboard box, taped it shut, and shoved it into the dark recesses of the attic. I didn't want to see their lying faces. I scoured the house from top to bottom, scrubbing floors, washing walls, as if I could physically wash away the filth of what they had done. It was a physical, exhausting, and deeply cleansing process. I didn't have time to feel sad. I only had time for action. By the end of the day, as the sun set, my house was quiet and clean. It felt a little less like a crime scene and a little more like my own again. The battle was just beginning, but I had won the first, most important round. I had taken back my home. For a few days, I existed in a strange bubble of controlled chaos. My life became a series of checklists and phone calls. I focused on the practicalities, long, strategic conversations with my lawyer, Eleanor, gathering years of financial documents, methodically changing the passwords on every online account, from our Netflix to our retirement fund portal. It was a way to keep my mind busy, to keep the overwhelming grief at bay. But I knew I couldn't stay in my fortress forever. The truth, in all its ugliness, had to come out. And I had to be the one to deliver the news. The thought of telling my parents, and especially of telling Walter, Audrey's kind, unsuspecting husband, filled me with a deep, aching dread. It was one thing to navigate my own pain, but it was another thing entirely to be the person who brings a sledgehammer down on someone else's world. I decided to start with Walter. He was a good man, a gentle, quiet man who absolutely adored my sister. He didn't deserve to live in a lie a single second longer. The thought of the words I had to say, the proof I had to show him, made me feel physically sick. I called him and asked if I could come over, saying it was important. He sounded surprised, but his voice was warm as he agreed immediately. I drove to their house, my stomach churning. It was the house where I'd attended countless family barbecues, baby showers, and holiday dinners. The video file was on a small USB drive in my purse, a tiny piece of black plastic that held the power to utterly ruin lives. Walter greeted me at the door with his usual warm, welcoming smile. "Carolyn! What a nice surprise. Come on in. Audrey's not here, though. She said she was staying with a friend for a few days to think things over." My heart ached for him, for his innocence. "I know, Walter," I said softly, stepping inside. "That's why I'm here. We need to talk." We sat in his cozy living room, surrounded by smiling pictures of him and Audrey, on their wedding day, on vacation in Hawaii. It was a gallery of their shared happiness. I didn't beat around the bush, there was no gentle way to do this. I told him everything, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt deep inside. I told him what I had suspected, how I had found out, and what I had seen. His face went through a rapid, painful series of emotions, deep confusion, then outright disbelief, then a dawning, sickening horror. "No," he whispered, shaking his head, a desperate, pleading look in his eyes. "No, not Audrey. She wouldn't. She couldn't. And Richard, they're like brother and sister. You must be mistaken." "I wish I was, Walter," I said, my voice gentle. "God, I wish I was. But I have proof." I took the USB drive out of my purse and placed it on the coffee table between us. "You deserve to see the truth for yourself. I am so sorry that I'm the one who has to show you." He stared at the USB drive as if it were a venomous snake. His hand trembled as he reached out and took it. I told him I would wait outside on the porch. I couldn't bear to be in the room, to witness the moment his world fell apart. I sat on his front porch steps, wrapping my arms around myself, listening to the birds chirping in the trees, a sound so normal it felt obscene. An eternity passed. Then, I heard it. A single, guttural cry from inside the house, a sound of such profound, animal pain that it brought hot tears to my own eyes. A few minutes later, the front door opened. Walter stood there, his face ashen, his eyes hollowed out with a grief so deep it was terrifying to look at. He just looked at me and nodded once, a gesture of shared, unbearable knowledge. I knew in that moment that his life, like mine, was now irrevocably broken into a before and an after. He filed for divorce the very next day. Telling my parents was even harder. They were in their late 70s, and their world revolved around their 2 daughters. The idea of them being anything but loving sisters was anathema to them. I drove to their house, sat them down in their cozy, sunlit living room that smelled of old books and lavender, and I told them. My mother started crying immediately, her hand flying to her mouth in shock, whispering no, no, no over and over. My father, a stoic, proud man of few words, just sat there, his face growing grimmer and grimmer with every word I spoke. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Carolyn?" he finally asked, his voice rough with disbelief. "This is a terrible, terrible accusation to make against your own sister." I knew words wouldn't be enough. I didn't want to show them the video. The thought of my elderly parents seeing their youngest daughter in such a sordid, shameful way was unbearable. But I had no choice. They needed to understand the depth of the betrayal. I took out my laptop, my hands shaking, and I played it. I fast-forwarded through the worst of it, showing them just enough for the truth to become absolute and undeniable. My mother let out a small, wounded sob and turned her head away, burying her face in her hands. My father watched the entire thing, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched in his cheek. His face was a mask of cold, hard fury. When it was over, he reached out and closed the laptop with a quiet, final click. He stood up, walked over to the window, and stared out at the garden his wife so loved for a long, silent minute. Finally, he turned back to me. His eyes were filled with a righteous anger I had never seen in him before. "Audrey," he said, his voice like gravel, "is no longer welcome in this house. She has brought a deep shame on this family." And that was that. Audrey, in her single, selfish act of betrayal, hadn't just lost a sister and a husband. She had lost her entire family. She was utterly and completely alone, cast out into a wilderness of her own making. The divorce proceedings were every bit as brutal and ugly as Eleanor had predicted. Richard, realizing that his pathetic apologies and angry threats were having no effect, hired a slick, expensive lawyer from a top city firm. Their strategy became clear from the very first hearing: to attack my character and paint me as an unhinged, vengeful woman who had illegally entrapped him. His lawyer argued that the video footage was an inadmissible violation of privacy, that I had lured them into a trap. He tried to portray Richard as the victim of a calculated setup by an emotionally unstable spouse. I sat there in the sterile, wood-paneled courtroom, listening to them twist the truth into a grotesque, unrecognizable caricature, and I felt that cold rage solidifying in my chest. This was not going to work. I looked over at Eleanor. She gave me a small, confident nod. She was prepared. When it was her turn to speak, she stood up, her presence calm and commanding. "Your Honor," she said, her voice cutting through the room with precision. "We are not here today to debate the ethics of a wife discovering her husband's infidelity in her own home. We are here to discuss the equitable division of assets in light of Mr. Thompson's repeated marital misconduct and financial deceit, which we are prepared to prove beyond any shadow of a doubt." And she did. She presented the mountain of evidence I had painstakingly collected. She laid out the credit card statements showing hotel rooms booked in Audrey's town, the receipts for expensive jewelry I had never seen, the ATM withdrawals from cities he was never supposed to be in on business. She created a timeline that perfectly aligned his secret expenditures with his lies to me. She laid out, in excruciating detail, how Richard had systematically drained our joint accounts and retirement funds to finance his affair. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with tired, intelligent eyes, listened intently, her expression growing more severe with each piece of evidence. She looked at the paperwork, then at Richard. His face was pale, his confident, expensive smirk completely gone. He was starting to realize that his charm and his high-priced lawyer were no match for the cold, hard truth of his own actions. The video itself was shown in the judge's private chambers, away from the public court. Eleanor, Richard, his lawyer, and the judge were the only ones present. Eleanor later told me that the judge watched the key portions in stony silence. When it was over, her ruling on our temporary motions was swift and decisive. I was granted exclusive use of the marital home pending the final settlement. Richard was ordered to pay significant temporary spousal support, as well as continue paying our youngest son's college tuition, an expense he had threatened to cut off. A comprehensive financial restraining order was put in place, freezing all major assets until they could be properly and equitably divided by the court. He was legally boxed in. Richard was visibly furious. He stormed out of the courtroom, muttering under his breath at his lawyer. But his losses were just beginning. The scandal, which we had tried to keep contained within the legal proceedings, started to leak out. Whispers spread like wildfire through our tight-knit social circles, then to his professional ones. Clients at his firm, who valued discretion and stability, started asking nervous questions. Partners who had once been his allies grew distant. He had built his entire professional reputation on being a solid, trustworthy, all-American family man. That image, the foundation of his success, was now shattered into a million pieces. His own family, who had initially rallied around him with a sense of tribal loyalty, started to back away as the undeniable financial evidence came to light. His brother, who was a silent partner in the firm, called an emergency meeting. I wasn't there, of course, but a mutual friend later told me it was a bloodbath. Richard was accused of jeopardizing the company's reputation and was forced to take an indefinite leave of absence, which everyone knew was just the first step toward being pushed out completely. The man who had arrogantly believed he could have everything was now watching it all slip through his fingers, and it was all his own damn fault. The court of law was one thing, but the court of public opinion was proving to be just as merciless. A few more months passed, a slow, grinding season of legal maneuvers and emotional exhaustion. The divorce process was a marathon, not a sprint, designed to wear you down. But I had Eleanor, and I had my cold, hard resolve. Richard's life, in contrast, was in a complete and utter freefall. As predicted, he had been formally pushed out of the company he had founded, forced to sell his shares at a fraction of their worth. His reputation in the marketing world was in shreds. He had to sell his beloved sports car and move into a small, soulless rental apartment on the other side of town. The friends who had once clapped him on the back at the country club now suddenly didn't see him when he walked into a room. He was a pariah. I, on the other hand, was slowly, carefully, rebuilding. The quiet in my house was no longer eerie, it was peaceful. I started seeing my friends again, the true ones, the women who had rallied around me with casseroles, bottles of wine, and the simple gift of their presence, never pushing me to talk but always ready to listen. I focused on my part-time job at the college, and my boss, a kind woman who knew a sanitized version of my story, offered me more hours and more responsibility. I took them gratefully. The work gave me structure, a sense of purpose outside the drama. My home, once a crime scene, was slowly becoming my sanctuary again. One gray Saturday afternoon, I was coming out of the grocery store, my cart full, my mind on what I would make for dinner. And I saw him. He was standing by my car, just waiting. I froze for a second, my hand tightening on the cold metal of the shopping cart. He looked terrible. He'd lost a significant amount of weight, his expensive suit hung on him, and his face was gaunt. His eyes were bloodshot and circled with dark, tired rings. The arrogant, charming, confident man I had married was gone. In his place was this hollowed-out, defeated stranger. "Carolyn," he said, his voice raspy and weak. He took a hesitant step toward me. "Can we please just talk for a minute?" Just a minute. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get in my car, lock the doors, and drive away. But I didn't. I stood my ground, my cart acting as a barrier between us. "There's nothing left to talk about, Richard." "Please," he begged, and the raw desperation in his voice was shocking. I've lost everything. My job, the house, my own family won't even speak to me. Everyone's gone." He ran a hand through his thinning hair, a gesture of pure despair. "I made a mistake, Carolyn. A terrible, stupid, unforgivable mistake. It was her, you know. She pursued me, she flattered my ego. I was weak, and I fell for it. I just stared at him. After everything, after all the pain and destruction, he was still trying to blame someone else. He was still trying to cast himself as the hapless victim in a drama of his own creation. The last flicker of any residual feeling I might have had for him, pity, nostalgia, anything, was extinguished in that moment. "You weren't weak, Richard," I said, my voice as cold and flat as the gray sky above us. "You were cruel. You were selfish. And you were arrogant. You thought you could have it all, that you were smarter than everyone, and that you'd never get caught. This isn't Audrey's fault. This is your fault. This is the life you chose to build, lie by lie." His face crumpled, the pathetic attempt at justification collapsing. "But, what we had, 20 years, all those memories, does that mean nothing to you now?" "It meant everything to me," I said, my voice unwavering. "Our life, our memories, they were my entire world. And you threw it all in the trash. You didn't just break it, you burned it to the ground, and you did it with my own sister in my own bed. So no. It doesn't mean anything to me anymore. It's just a reminder of how foolish and blind I was." Tears started to well up in his eyes. Actual tears of self-pity. "I'm begging you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "What can I possibly do to fix this? The irony was staggering, almost comical. For years, I had been the one begging. Begging for his time when he was always working late. Begging for his attention when his eyes were always on his phone. Begging for his honesty when my gut told me he was lying. Now here he was, stripped of his power, his money, and his charm, begging me. I looked him straight in the eye, and I felt a profound sense of calm settle over me. "There is nothing you can do," I said. "You don't get to fix this. You just have to live with what you've done." I paused, letting the finality of the words sink in. "You're not the man who destroyed my life, Richard. You're just the man who set me free from a lie. Now, if you'll excuse me, my ice cream is melting." And with that, I pushed my cart past him, unlocked my car, and began loading my groceries. I moved with a deliberate, unhurried pace. I didn't look back at him, not even once. I got into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away, leaving him standing alone in the middle of the vast, gray parking lot. He was the architect of his own destruction, and his project was finally complete. That was the last time I ever spoke to him. The divorce was finalized a month later, a quiet affair in a sterile courtroom. The settlement was, as Eleanor had promised, more than fair. The law was on my side. I was awarded the house, which held the majority of our equity, a significant portion of his now dwindling retirement funds, and substantial alimony for 5 years to help me get back on my feet. He fought it, of course, his lawyer making blustering arguments, but in the end, he had no choice. The evidence of both his marital and financial infidelity was too overwhelming. He was lucky he didn't lose more. The very first thing I did after the papers were signed and the ink was dry was call a real estate agent. I put the house on the market. It held too many memories, too many ghosts. Every corner held a story, and too many of them were now tainted. It sold surprisingly quickly, and with the proceeds, I bought a small, charming townhouse in a neighborhood closer to the city. It was bright and airy, with a little patio garden out back. It was all mine. Every inch of it. I filled it with new furniture that I picked up myself, with colorful art that made me happy, and with new, quiet memories. I started to rediscover the woman I was before I became Richard's wife. On a whim, I enrolled in a certificate program for landscape design at the local community college, turning a lifelong hobby into a new path. I found a deep, quiet joy in learning the Latin names of plants, in sketching out garden plans, in getting my hands dirty in the soil. After I graduated, I started a small business, designing and planting gardens for other people. It wasn't a high-powered career, but it was mine. I was building something beautiful, making things grow. It was healing. Emily, our daughter, who had been away at college through the worst of the implosion, was my unwavering rock. She was old enough to understand the depth of the betrayal, and her fury on my behalf was a fierce and beautiful thing. For a long time, she refused to speak to her father or to Audrey, her aunt. She saw the situation with a clear-eyed wisdom that belied her years and stood by me without a single question. Her unwavering support and love was a gift I will cherish for the rest of my life. As for them? Their lives fell apart in the most spectacularly fitting way, a perfect case study in reaping what you sow. Richard was never able to recover professionally. The stain on his reputation was permanent. He bounced between low-level, soul-crushing consulting jobs, his salary a pathetic fraction of what it once was. He lives alone in that sad little rental apartment, a ghost of the powerful man he used to be. Audrey's fate was, in some ways, even sadder. After Walter swiftly and silently divorced her, and her parents formally cut her off, she was completely and utterly alone. I heard through a distant cousin that she moved to a different state a few years ago, hoping to start over where no one knew her or her story. But you can't outrun the person you are in the mirror. She left a wide trail of destruction behind her, and I have to imagine that's a heavy burden to carry through life. I don't hate her anymore. I don't feel much of anything for her at all. She is just a stranger now, a stranger with a familiar face from a life I no longer live. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on my little patio in the evening, with a glass of wine, surrounded by the flowers I planted, I think about the woman I used to be. That trusting, slightly naive woman who believed in the fairy tale of a perfect life. I don't miss her. I don't mourn her. Betrayal didn't break me. It woke me up. It forced me to find a strength I never knew I possessed. They thought they were taking my life away from me, but all they really did was give me a new one. A better one. A true one. An honest one. A free one. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to hear your thoughts, or even your own experiences, in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow and allows me to keep sharing more stories with all of you.